I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. According to a report released last week by the Labor Department, prices in June rose 9.1% year over year. The worse than expected jump marks the largest 12-month increase in 40 years. While discussing inflation and the most recent CPI report on the Senate floor Tuesday, Senator Mike Lee said, quote, "The Biden administration's evolving blame game has shifted. It shifted its focus from the pandemic to the supply chain, and then from the supply chain to Putin. As midterms approach, GOP lawmakers have been united in their efforts to blame inflation on the Biden administration's economic policies. Democrats have largely rebuffed these claims and have blamed high prices on supply chain issues from the pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine. Here's more from the Utah Republican.
Madam President, we've broken another record. Unfortunately, it's not the kind of record we want to boast about. Last week, the latest consumer price index exceeded inflation expectations at a staggering 9.1%. In Utah, that rate is much higher. The Biden administration's evolving blame game has shifted. It's shifted its focus from the pandemic to the supply chain, and then from the supply chain to Putin. There is, however, a more coherent answer. Government continues to spend more than it has, a lot more. Last year, we saw this play out as Congress spent a stunning $6.8 trillion, while collecting just over $4 trillion in revenue. With the return of legislative earmarks, pork barrel spending, meanwhile, has increased over 1,700%. Now, rather than recognizing the problems associated with spending more than the government brings in, the government simply prints itself more money. Like a child stricken with affluenza, rather than being cut off, the government simply helps itself to more money. It doesn't take long to lose the value of a dollar when you're not spending your own money. Government is no different. While hardworking Americans pinch pennies, lawmakers spend carelessly. To pay for their next project, they threaten to raise taxes. When they don't have the support to raise taxes, they nevertheless continue to spend and drive up inflation. Inflation is nothing but an invisible tax on the people. A tax on the people that, I would add, disproportionately affects hardworking Americans, poor and middle-class Americans. Sometimes the wealthiest of the wealthy can find ways to get even wealthier in times of inflation. Everyone else gets hurt. With no action, the reckless spending will drive us off a financial cliff. But our spending trajectory is such that we cannot afford to wait for the consensus needed to pass a constitutional amendment. While hardworking Americans wait, I've introduced the Preventing Runaway Inflation and Consumer Expenditures Act, or the PRICE Act, to stop the bleeding. The PRICE Act requires a 3/5 supermajority of senators to approve new spending measures when the nation's inflation rate is at or above 3%. The PRICE Act is desperately needed. This insatiable spending machine is now costing Utahns $881 a month, more than they paid last year. And that's on top of what they already pay in taxes. Those are $881 every month for which Utahns receive nothing in return. It represents money that could be spent toward their home, toward their child's college education, toward filling their empty gas tank. But instead, millions of Americans will look at the skyrocketing cost of living and determine that they must sacrifice their wants, and in many cases, their needs, just to meet their most basic, fundamental necessities. My PRICE Act flips the script. It doesn't altogether prevent lawmakers from spending when inflation is above 3%, but it requires lawmakers to offset that spending with cuts from somewhere else. In essence, it puts the impetus on Congress to weigh its legislative wants against the legislative needs of the American people. That's because for everyone living in reality, a budget means something. Failure to live within a budget has profound consequences. When Jack has to pay an extra $93 a month on food, it begins to doubt his ability to feed his family. When Jill has to pay an extra $145 a month for housing, she doubts her ability to keep a roof over her child's head. When Joe has to pay an extra $404 a month on transportation, he doubts his ability to get his child to and from soccer practice. So why is it that when inflation is at 9.1%, lawmakers are still spending and looking for ways to spend even more? As Americans are filled with financial fear and doubt, why is it that Senate Democrats want to spend an additional $1 trillion for their Build Back Better plan? Congress is failing to exercise self-restraint during this period of unprecedented inflation. As Americans tighten their belts, Congress has opened the spigot. If a household ran this disaster of a budget, the family would quickly be met with foreclosures, repossessions, and ultimately bankruptcy. Ronald Reagan couldn't have been more prescient when he described inflation as, quote, the price we pay for those government benefits everyone thought were free. While members tout their shiny new pet projects, Americans are footing the bill. It's unconscionable that Congress continues to pat itself on the back for passing massive spending bills, while the country has a financial millstone around its neck. It's high time that Congress subject itself to the same cutbacks that working-class families are facing now. Although I wish members of Congress would self-impose these restraints, this latest push for a new $1 trillion spending plan shows that that's unlikely to happen. Given our long demonstrated lack of self-restraint, it's time to pass the Price Act. Congress has become the trust fund baby that doesn't understand the value of a dollar. The Price Act is the recognition that sometimes you need to take away the credit card. And so to that end, Mr. President, we'd like to secure passage of this measure to protect the American people. And as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Budget Committee be discharged from further consideration of S. 3770, and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?